and done in a manner that really makes a mockery of diplomacy, because there was still an opportunity to be able to strike a deal that would be far more effective than this. We still don't know exactly what damage has been done, but it does appear extremely unlikely that the Iranian nuclear program has truly been eliminated. And that results most likely that there will be continued bombing and not this kind of a one and done that Trump seems to have envisioned.
And yet, diplomacy only really works when both sides are willing to sit down and talk. And what we've had from Iran over the last few days has been not only a complete pushback, not only saying that they're unwilling to negotiate under bombardment, but saying that Europe's proposals were completely unworkable, refusing to roll back enrichment to 0%. So do you actually believe that there was any chance of getting the Iranians to engage in meaningful diplomacy?
Certainly. I mean, I would remind your viewers that, of course, the United Kingdom kept on saying that that Ukraine should not have to negotiate while it was being bombarded. So it seems to be the very same logic that the Iranians have applied here. I nevertheless think that it was a mistake of them, not that they didn't talk to the Europeans, because I don't think they're that relevant in this equation any longer, but rather that they refused to engage directly with the United States. I think it would have been much better if they had done so. But when it comes to the requirement of zero enrichment, which incidentally the Europeans had abandoned more than 15 years ago and were trying to convince the United States to drop as well, because they recognized correctly that as long as that was the negotiating position or the red line of the West, there would never be a deal. And the only time we've had a deal is when the West actually accepted that there would be restricted enrichment taking place in Iran under strict inspections rather than pushing for zero. When Trump started this negotiation, he had not adopted the zero enrichment position. That's the Israeli red line. His red line was no weaponization. That's part of the reason why the negotiations actually were successful at first. Halfway through, he shifted the goalpost and adopted the Israeli red line of zero enrichment. And it's since then that we have seen this trajectory towards military confrontation, which was highly predictable.
Shrita, we've just had a comment from Rafael Grossi, head of the UN nuclear watchdog, the International Atomic Energy Agency, who has said that there will be an emergency meeting of the agency on Monday. What is your fear now in terms of how Iran might try to utilize what remains of its nuclear know-how? Because, of course, facilities can be destroyed, know-how can't, and whether they will actually try to rush to weaponize if they were not already doing so?
Well, there's no evidence that they were doing so. I think it's important to remind the viewers of that, and the IAEA has testified to that. I do fear, however, that that is a very likely outcome, that this is the natural reaction that they would have, as almost any other country would have, to this type of an attack. Of course, there's other things that they may do in the medium, which is, for instance, walking out of the NPT altogether. Which would mean that the IAEA would no longer have any access to what is happening inside of Iran's nuclear program, because they would be kicking out all of the inspectors. All of these things were predictable, and part of the reason why the IAEA, as well as nuclear experts and non-proliferation experts throughout, have warned about this only looking as a success in the short term, but in the long term actually being a failure. This is exactly what happened when the Israelis bombed the Iraqi nuclear reactor, Osirak, in 1981. At first, it looked as a great success, but later on, we learned that as a result of this, Saddam Hussein quadrupled his nuclear budget. And had he not invaded Kuwait in August 1991, had he only waited 6 months or so, he would have actually had a nuclear weapon. And the world had no idea what was going on in the Iraqi nuclear program at the time.
And yet, critics of Iran would say, well, look, enrichment at 60%, which is where Iran was at, in enriching about 400 kilograms of uranium to 60%, there is no other need for that. There is no need in terms of energy, in terms of medical use for enrichment at that level, apart from trying to make a nuclear warhead. And get that coupled with the extremely secretive behavior of the Iranian regime with regards to nuclear weapons inspections over the years means that, you know, Iran has maybe not brought today on itself, but I mean there was absolutely no trust remaining between Western governments and certainly the Israeli government and Iran.
Well, the Israeli government is not part of these arrangements because it is a nuclear weapon state that is not part of the NPT. So that's not really a factor here. It is absolutely true that there is no civilian use of 60% enriched uranium, and that this was very clear that this was part of what the Iranians viewed as their leverage that they would negotiate away. Already in the very beginning of these negotiations that Trump conducted, the Iranians agreed to go down to 3.67%, which then negates almost everything else that was part of the premise of your question, because that was part of the negotiation to get rid of that. And that option still existed. The United States and Israel chose to start war instead of actually fulfilling these negotiations.
Trita Parsi, Executive Vice President at the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us here on BBC News. Well, let's turn to our Chief North America correspondent, Gary O'Donoghue, who is live with us from Washington. Gary, it's still early where you are, of course, but I'm sure it's been a fairly sleepless night for all of you, just as it has been for us. Just give us your sense of the enormity of what we are seeing here, that an American president who campaigned on America first and ending the eternal wars has now actually done what was the unthinkable and attacked Iran.
Yeah, and I think there is some surprise here that this has come around so quickly, particularly, Mark, after that 2-week deadline that the president issued on Thursday through his press secretary. We know that after that, of course, there was some meetings in Europe with the Iranians, and yesterday the Iranian foreign minister speaking as well. So it's possible that those public statements, along with what the Americans were hearing through the back channels, made them make up their mind pretty quickly that Iran wasn't going to, that it backed itself into a position in the same way as, in some ways, Donald Trump has backed himself into a position setting these deadlines. So that's all kind of in the mix at the moment. There is some criticism coming from Democrats in Congress, as you can imagine. I think the question will be to what extent this split in Donald Trump's base over attacking Iran and getting involved in another foreign war, as it's put, how much that will fracture further as a result of this. One thing I think is worth bearing in mind, Donald Trump, the other day said really that, ground troops, putting boots on the ground was somewhere you really didn't want to go ever. And I wonder whether he's starting to think that perhaps using these bombers at tens of thousands of feet, using these missiles fired from submarines miles and miles away, is a sort of step short of really breaking his promise or getting involved in that sense. I think that may be a pretty optimistic view, because certainly where you are, there's clearly no doubt that America is now a combatant in this conflict.
Gary, given that this is very much a unilateral American move alongside Israel, i.e. not in cooperation with America's Western partners, can we read anything into the fact that the B-2 bombers were deployed to Guam, to the US overseas territory, and which is very far away from Iran, and not, for example, to Diego Garcia, the base in the Indian Ocean that Britain still effectively runs and allows America to operate from? Can we read anything into that in terms of the Americans trying to avoid a kind of a diplomatic collision with the Brits about this?
I think that's possible, although what I would say is that Donald Trump is unlike previous US presidents. He doesn't feel he needs that kind of cover from his allies. If he's going to do something, he doesn't mind doing it alone. Much of his foreign policy is about America first, and some people say America alone. So I'm not entirely sure. I mean, clearly that would have put the British government in a pretty difficult position, and maybe it didn't want to do that. David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, was here last week, and he went off to Geneva to deliver a pretty tough message to the Iranians after having met with the National Security Council people here in Washington. America has these various options militarily, flying these B-2s, and of course they can refuel in the air. They can, be refueled in the air, so they can span the globe, quite frankly, independently. So that may well have been a factor. We'll learn, I think, in the coming days. And Mark, we're expecting in probably about 3 or 4 hours from now, a briefing from the Pentagon. the Pentagon doesn't do briefings anymore, basically, but the Defense Secretary, the Secretary of Defense, and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs are going to stand up at 8 o'clock local time, and they will be asked a lot of questions by journalists in that room, and I'm sure that will be among them. And also, what kind, with what confidence can they at this stage say what they've achieved? Because obviously this was done at night time. They've got to wait for the satellite imagery to come in. They have other means as well of trying to bottom out what they've actually achieved. But the president, described it as a sort of total success within minutes of it happening. And I think people will feel that the jury is a little bit out on that right now until there's some more concrete evidence.
Yeah, just a couple of moments ago while you were talking, Gary, we were watching the B-2 bombers, which were taking off, I think, on an earlier training mission. There, of course, we can see Donald Trump in those pictures. But Gary, I also wonder, there were calls before this morning from Democrats, for example, for Trump to come to Congress and reiterating the fact that Congress needs to give approval for America to go to war. Just explain the kind of potential political and constitutional fallout and complications that there could be, because I presume Trump's argument will be, well, America has not gone to war. This is an individual strike which did not require pre-authorization from Congress.
Yeah, I think to the extent that he chooses to engage with those in Congress calling for that, I think that will be the argument. People here, they use the phrase here, one and done, and that's how they're trying to describe this action, that it's an isolated action, and it's designed to bring the Iranians back to the table. It's a pretty optimistic view, but it's the view at the moment. And also, to be honest, American presidents of all flavors over the last quarter century or so have really eroded Congress's ability to have a say, if you like, in military action. Ever since September the 11th and the authorization for military force and things like that, there's been a sort of a shift in power away, more executive power into the White House, into the administration. He wants to centralize that power, make the presidency even more powerful than it currently is. And so I think he will spend very little time worrying about what Congress thinks. And of course, even though narrowly, he controls both the House and the Senate right now.
Indeed. Gary O'Donoghue in Washington, thanks very much indeed. Let's go to Jerusalem now and bring in my colleague Dan Johnson. Dan, I want to ask you in a moment or two about the air raid sirens and the missiles this morning, but let's just first of all pick up on the potential blowback to America. Give us a sense of America's vulnerability, if you like, in this region, the kind of American military presence here, and what we have heard even as recently as yesterday from the Houthis, the Iran-backed rebel group in Yemen, and how Americans could be targeted by them.
Yeah, there are a range of options for the Iranians to target if indeed they decide to do that. You've got thousands of American service personnel on air bases around this region in countries like Iraq, Kuwait, Qatar, the Gulf states, and you've got naval bases in Bahrain. They're all within reach of Iran if Iran chooses to target them. You've got American companies that are based in this part of the world. We know that diplomats were encouraged to evacuate over the past few days, not just Americans, but other international diplomats. Perhaps that was a sign of the likelihood of this sort of strike that we've seen. But no doubt there are still many people left in the region representing America. They could be vulnerable if Iran chooses to do that. There are also the threats to international shipping. The Houthis said that they would target ships again in the Red Sea if this happened. There's what Iran could do to international oil supplies with its control over the Strait of Hormuz. So many different ways in which this could play out now. It's in the hands of Iran's supreme leader, I guess, the Ayatollah, who had threatened that if the US did launch strikes against his country, it would feel irreparable damage. And it may not just be the US and Israel that feels that damage. It could be something that hits worldwide.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, you mentioned the Strait of Hormuz. About a fifth of all international crude oil goes through those waters. So that is a very vulnerable pressure point. Meanwhile, Dan, if in the shorter term, Iran continues to retaliate directly towards Israel, as you and I heard and felt this morning, give us a sense of what was going on in Jerusalem.
Yeah, just as most Israelis were waking up, before some had even managed to absorb the news that these US strikes had taken place overnight, they heard the alerts through their phones and then the sirens sounding, the instruction to go to the shelters as another Iranian missile attack was launched towards Israel. We heard the loud interceptions over Jerusalem. It was really heavy for a few minutes, but it looks like here, at least in this city, the air defences were strong and managed to intercept all those missiles, but that's not the case right across Israel. At least 10 missiles have got through and hit at different sites. The emergency teams are still responding there. It happened about 2.5 hours ago. We have pictures coming through that show some of that damage at different sites around the country. 16 people are reported to have been hurt in those attacks, and Israelis are braced for more of that. They'd already been put on high alert. Workplaces and schools across the country closed today. The airspace remains closed, as it has been for the entirety of this conflict, and gatherings are banned. Israelis are not ordered to stay at home, but they are essentially encouraged to stay off the streets to try to keep themselves safe, in the expectation that there will be further attacks coming from Iran. It's just a question now of exactly how heavy that is, when it comes, and what other targets Iran chooses to hit, and what the response and the impact is on other neighbouring countries now. Which states are going to support Iran as allies? Which states are going to support the Americans? And will Iran, if it does target those potential US vulnerabilities in this region, what sort of a fight is it then picking with its neighbours?
Dan Johnson in Jerusalem, thanks very much indeed. Big questions, some of which we will put now to Mina Al-Oraibi, who is editor-in-chief of The National and a Middle East analyst. Mina, very good to have you with us here on BBC News. What are your concerns and your thoughts this morning for the wider region as we face not only the American bombing of Iran, but also potential massive blowback from Iran?
The American decision to enter the war, despite the fact that diplomats in the region thought they had at least a few more days to try to come up with solutions that would not include the Americans entering this war. So there's a huge concern that this has gone ahead. Now, the American president announced, as we were just hearing from your correspondents, announced that this was a huge success, a spectacular success. The question is, what is the target here? If it's only to take out those 3 sites that the U.S. struck, then of course militarily the U.S. has the largest military in the world, and it would be a success. There's no question about that. But then what happens? And that's the big question, and that's the big concern. Particularly if this now becomes a much more wider war and more attacks are carried out by the U.S., then America is back at war in the region once again.
And yet you talk about how there was the space of a few more days potentially to negotiate, but sources suggesting that those negotiations were not really going very far, and that, well, certainly the Americans saying that they believe that that Iran was stringing them along. Donald Trump gave Iran a 60-day deadline, and it was on day 61 that Israel struck. So do you not feel that diplomacy had run its course?
Diplomacy can never run its course, otherwise we'll have wars going on for years on end. The diplomacy I was referencing was the efforts that were being put in the last few days, particularly by regional players, speaking to all sides, speaking to the Iranians, Israelis, and the Americans to try to find a way out. The meeting that happened in Geneva with the 3 countries, the French, the Germans, and the British, did not go very far, but at least it was seen as an opening of what could possibly happen to ensure that the war doesn't become wider and greater. I agree with you that diplomacy so far has not been successful, and therefore we see the strikes that are happening both in Iran and Israel. And yet, what other option is there? So if the U.S. stops now and it is a one-off strike, then that is one thing. However, if there are continued strikes and how the Iranians react, we could see that the region being caught up in this war, but also for both the Iranians and the Israelis, as citizens, as ordinary people, this is a very scary war that is only escalating. And without diplomacy, there is no horizon to de-escalate.
And if this is not a one and done, if this continues and escalates, potentially trying to push the supreme leader out of power in Iran. What is your fear there about what could potentially come next, and the lack of thinking on Israel's part, for example, about the day after?
So this idea that suddenly this war doesn't become about Iran's nuclear program or even its missiles, rather becomes about regime change, is quite concerning, because what is the plan here? And we've seen, be it Iraq, be it Libya, be it even Syria up until a few months ago, concerns that, again, you get a country that gets caught up in incredible chaos and turmoil without an end in sight. And so the question becomes, is this suddenly going to become a mission about regime change or regime collapse? What comes in its place, and what is not only the destabilizing elements for the entire region, but also the suffering of the Iranian people, is something that we cannot ignore. And rightly so, also, of course, thinking about what this means for Israel. Israel is no more secure today than it was when you said the talks were ongoing with the Iranians regarding their nuclear program. And so the question is, what is the end game? Now, if there is a move for regime change, there is no clear opposition that would come in its place. And also, what happens to a country of 90 million people without proper governance or actually a clear end in sight of how the war ends?
Mina Al-Oraibi, Editor-in-Chief of The National and Middle East Analyst, thank you very much indeed for your time here on BBC News. Well, a quick reminder that President Trump says the US has completed a successful attack on 3 nuclear sites in Iran. Iran's foreign minister says that the attacks violate international law and will have everlasting consequences. Reports indicate that America's B-2 bombers were used. They are capable of carrying the only bombs thought to be able to penetrate underground nuclear plants. The 3 nuclear sites in Iran that are located in Natanz, Isfahan and Fordow, which is buried deep underground. Iranian authorities have confirmed that part of the Fordow complex has been attacked. It comes as the conflict between Iran and Israel enters its 10th day. Israel says it was in full coordination with Washington over the strikes. Our World News correspondent Joe Inwood has the very latest.
In the end, within 2 weeks, meant waiting 2 days. Donald Trump said he would take a fortnight to decide whether or not to bomb Iran's nuclear sites. As he arrived back in Washington yesterday evening, not a hint about what was about to take place. And then, in the early hours of this morning, confirmation that the US had bombed 3 nuclear sites in Iran. President Trump calling them very successful, adding that a full payload of bombs was dropped on Fordow, Iran's main enrichment site.
Thank you very much.
Flanked by his vice president, secretaries of state and defense, he delivered a presidential address to the nation with a message for the world.
Tonight I can report to the world that the strikes were a spectacular military success. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. Iran, the bully of the Middle East, must now make peace. If they do not, future attacks will be far greater and a lot easier.
These are the type of planes which carried out the attack. Long-range US B-2 stealth bombers, equipped with GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrators, the only weapon able to damage Iran's nuclear plant at Fordow, buried deep underground. That facility was one of the 3 hit last night. The attacks came as diplomatic efforts continued, but with little sign of progress. For Iran, last night confirming long-held suspicions, as set out just yesterday by their foreign minister.
We have come, unfortunately, to the conclusion that the United States has been in this aggression from the beginning. You know, they deny, they keep saying that they are not involving, but we have many indications that they have been involved from day one.
There had been growing international calls for restraint and negotiations. The UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres called last night's attacks a dangerous escalation. But in Israel, which launched this war, they were warmly welcomed.
History will record that President Trump acted to deny the world's most dangerous regime the world's most dangerous weapons. His leadership today has created a pivot of history that can help lead the Middle East and beyond to a future of prosperity and peace.
The White House released these photos from inside the Situation Room. Donald Trump has called on Iran to make peace following the attacks, but Iran called them a grave violation of international law that would have everlasting consequences, saying it reserved all options as to how it would respond. Joe Inwood, BBC News.
Well, Israel's President Isaac Herzog has reacted to the American strikes, saying in the pages of human history, this is a moment when the principles of liberty, responsibility and security have triumphed. A decisive moment between the axis of terror and evil and the axis of hope, he went on. Thank you, President Trump. Thank you, United States of America. Meanwhile, Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi condemned the US strikes and says Iran is reserving all options to defend its sovereignty. In a post on X, Araghchi adds, the events this morning are outrageous and will have everlasting consequences. Each and every member of the UN, he said, must be alarmed over this extremely dangerous, lawless and criminal behaviour. Meanwhile, the UN chief, Antonio Guterres, has issued a statement about the strikes. He said, I am gravely alarmed by the use of force by the United States against Iran today. This is a dangerous escalation in a region already on the edge and a direct threat to international peace and security. He went on, there is a growing risk that this conflict could rapidly get out of control with catastrophic consequences for civilians, the region and the world. And the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, that's the UN nuclear watchdog, Rafael Grossi, has responded to the strikes, posting, in light of the urgent situation in Iran, I am convening an emergency meeting of the IAEA Board of Governors for tomorrow, Monday. Well, here is an Israeli official speaking about the Iranian missile attacks on Haifa in northern Israel this morning.
What we have over here is a rocket attack on Haifa city. Our ambulances and intensive care unit rushed to the scene. We discovered over here 4 minor wounded and 2 people with anxiety reaction. That's it. Our EMTs and paramedics rushed them to the hospital within 10 minutes, and thank God that's everything for now. One of my volunteers lives over here in the building behind us. He was minor wounded. He left everything, gave first aid, and only after the event he went to the hospital to check himself. Other than that, everything is okay.
Well, those strikes, the Israelis say, they made 10 direct impacts here in Israel, with at least 16 people injured. We heard the sirens, we got the alerts, and we went to our bunkers as well. So a very, very clear sign that the war is very much still continuing apace, despite those American bombs this morning. Well, the BBC is unable to report from inside Iran, but our colleagues at the BBC Persian service, which is part of the BBC World Service, monitors reaction from the country. Earlier, I spoke to BBC Persian correspondent Kasrin Naji, who updated us on reaction to the strikes in Iran.
We've had the Atomic Energy Organization of Iran issuing a statement, not giving any details of the extent of the damage to these 3 sites, but going on and on about how this attack was a violation of the international law. It was an attack on nuclear facilities that international law forbids in a big way, and that they wanted, the statement said Iran wants the international community, or hopes the international community will condemn this attack. We also had a statement from this nuclear safety agency in Iran saying that there is no risk of radiation getting out of these facilities spreading to the outside. They said they have measured the vicinity, there's no rising level of radioactivity, and they also say that it is because one of the reasons why there is no spread of radioactivity is because they have taken certain measures beforehand. This is a reference to the fact that some Iranian officials in the last few days, they've been saying something to the effect that they have moved their highly enriched uranium from Isfahan and from Fordo to secret places that they have not told the IAEA, the atomic agency, the UN atomic agency, which is very serious. It means that possibly some 400 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60% and more uranium enriched to 20% are somewhere that are not under the IAEA observation, i.e. they don't know where it is at the moment.
But just to be clear, Khazra, even though the president himself is talking about complete obliteration of these sites, there's been no visual evidence so far provided by the Iranians and no comment about the extent of the damage in Fordo beyond the kind of condemnation from the Iranian government over the strikes themselves.
Yes, in fact, that's right. We don't know how extensive the damage is. Iranians haven't said anything. And I just seen something from the Israeli side saying they don't know how extensive the damage was, but they think that nevertheless the attack has set back Iranian nuclear program for many years.
Yeah, setback is not exactly the same as completely destroyed. So we will wait to see evidence of the extent of that damage, because, of course, so there was so much debate as to whether the program could be completely obliterated, and indeed the know-how with it. Khazra, what is your sense now of what the likely retaliation is going to be from Iran? Obviously very difficult to read the regime, but what are the kind of the calls coming out in the Iranian state media so far? Are they on the hawkish side, or are they on the kind of more de-escalation side?
They are on the hawkish side, and I've seen some messages on social media by some Iranian commentators, mostly hardliners in Tehran, saying that, well, the Americans have asked for it and we will give it to them. So they are planning some kind of a military reaction. We will have to wait and see what that might be. You know, they have this extensive ballistic missile silos in various parts of the country. They can use that to attack American bases in the region, or they have these proxies in Iraq who could do much the same sort of thing from the Iraqi side. So we just have to wait and see. But I expect some fireworks in the next few days before the dust settles. But I'm not sure the dust will settle anytime soon, in the sense that already President Trump is threatening that if Iran doesn't come to the negotiating table to agree to a peace deal, there will be more attacks. So that's from him suggesting that there will be more trouble for Iran in the future. So, and also the fact that this stockpile of highly enriched uranium we're not certain where it is now. That is another cause for trouble in the weeks and months and probably years to come.
Khazra, our US partners at CBS News have reported that the White House passed a message to Iran that this was an attack on the nuclear facilities and not an attempt at regime change. But what is your assessment of the position of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei at the moment, not only after 9 days of this devastating war with Israel, but now with the kind of crown jewels, if you like, in Iran, the nuclear enrichment sites, if not obliterated, at least severely damaged. What is the strength that he still has over his country?
This attack last night is obviously a major blow to Iran. Don't forget that the nuclear program in Iran has been going on for over 20 years, and it has cost the country hundreds of billions of dollars, if you take into account the cost of the sanctions against Iran because of these nuclear facilities and nuclear activities, the nuclear program. If you take that cost into account, it goes up to hundreds of billions of dollars. And today, that is in ruins, that program. So there's not much of that is left, obviously. I mean, even if the damage is not that extensive, they might decide to repeat the attack and make sure that the facilities are completely razed to the ground or rendered completely useless. So anyway, the program is in ruins. And that is a blow to Iran's supreme leader and his standing. After all, he has to explain what happened. Why did we spend so much money on something that has come to this and has cost the country so much and has sent the country into poverty from being a rich country? So I suppose politically it will be very difficult for him. But he's a survivor. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has survived many of the big crises in the past decades. So we will have to wait and see. But this, together with Israeli attacks of the last 9 or 10 days in Iran, it has the whole thing, the two together, the attacks by Israel and the US, has obviously weakened the regime and its pillars and what keeps it going. And particularly a lot of the attacks by Israel has been against Iran's Revolutionary Guard and military sites, which means both of these, the military, as the army, the Revolutionary Guard, these are pillars of this regime, and they have been weakened. So we are looking at a regime that is probably on its knees, but hasn't quite fallen yet, and it may not fall, or it may. We just don't know.
Kasra Naji there from the BBC's Persian service. Let me just show you the live scene in Haifa in northern Israel, which was one of the parts of the country that was hit by that Iranian missile barrage, which we felt and heard here in Tel Aviv as well. You can see there that the emergency teams are still on the ground. We've just had some updated figures actually from the Israeli Health Ministry, who now say that 86 people were injured in the Iranian missile barrage, that around 30 Iranian missiles were sent early this morning into Israel. Of the 86 injured, 2 are in moderate condition, 77 are in mild condition. But a reminder there of how the Iranian missiles are still breaching Israel's defense shields and are still causing quite significant damage on the ground in certain parts of the country, and also several dozen injuries. Well, let's speak to Noga Tarnopolsky, a journalist with 2 decades of experience covering the Middle East, who joins us live from Jerusalem. Noga, when you look at those numbers of injured just in this morning, and also since the war with Iran began, I understand about 24, 25 people have been killed. That's a pretty high number for deaths in Israel during a war. How do you feel that is going to affect Israeli public support for this war? And what do we know so far about the level of Israeli public support behind Benjamin Netanyahu at the moment?
These are very nuanced questions and responses, and obviously limited in time. So what we know for now is clearly Prime Minister Netanyahu bet that this would restore his shine as Israel's Mr. Security. We can see that in the photoshopped images he posted of himself over the weekend, something between Hollywood posters and campaign snapshots with a lion roaring behind him and an F-16 Israeli jet. He is hoping for a big boost. It's not clear to me whether he'll get it. He could. I suspect that Donald Trump's involvement in this war is going to be seen as a very big victory for Netanyahu. That said, this is the first war between Israel and another state, a powerful, well-armed state, I think in more than 50 years. Israel's wars have been against terror groups, even what are called the two Lebanon wars, the first and the second Lebanon war. These were not wars against Lebanon. These were wars against Hezbollah, terror groups in Lebanon. So this is a very, very different scenario. Israelis haven't lived through this, I believe, since 1973. And it is shocking. Today, 2 entire buildings fell to the ground in Tel Aviv. So we're adding every single day wounded, dead, and homeless. Remember that more than 100,000 Israelis, believe it or not, remain homeless from the evacuations of northern Israel that began on October 8th, 2023, in preparation for that battle with Hezbollah. The Israeli government has proved itself.
Sorry, Noga, to interrupt. You talk about how rare it is for Israel to go to war with a state in this way. A state that is of 90 million people, very large, and where there is there's no sort of opposition in waiting, let's say, if the regime were to fall. So, given that, and given the apparent lack of sort of thinking of what would happen in the day after if it came to that, how concerned are you about where the war goes from here?
I'm very concerned about where the war goes from here. It's my understanding that at least the Israeli government truly, fervently hopes that this Iranian regime will fall. And as you say, there is no alternative government in waiting. Iran could very easily, if that were to happen, I understand that the current Iranian regime is disliked, but is very powerfully entrenched. So even if this were to happen, as Netanyahu wishes, it's entirely unclear that this would be better for either Israel or for the rest of the world, or obviously for Iran. We're in a very different, dangerous situation. And I also want to mention that it's dangerous also for Netanyahu. Israelis are not accustomed to seeing their entire residential streets demolished by a bomb. Israeli residential centers are being turned into camps of war. People are dying. I'm not sure how long of a leash Netanyahu has for this.
Noga Tarnopolsky, Middle East journalist, joining us live from Jerusalem. Thanks very much indeed. Well, world reaction has been coming in thick and fast. Sir Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, has been commenting on the latest developments. Joining me now is Tony Bonsignore, our political correspondent from our newsroom in London. Tony, tell us what the British Prime Minister had to say.
Yes, Mark. So let me give you this statement that we got around about an hour ago from Downing Street. The Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, saying Iran's nuclear program is a grave threat to international security. Iran, he says, can never be allowed to develop a nuclear weapon, and the US has taken action to alleviate that threat. The situation in the Middle East, he continues, remains volatile, and stability in the region is a priority. We call on Iran to return to the negotiating table and reach a diplomatic solution to end this crisis. That's a message, a consistent message from the Prime Minister in recent days for de-escalation, for negotiation. I can also tell you, Mark, having spoken to Downing Street this morning, that we know that there was no UK involvement in these strikes. We know that the Prime Minister was told them about them in advance, but no request was made for any UK involvement, including using the bases at Diego Garcia and Akrotiri. So that's the information we have at the moment from Downing Street.
Tony, the optics of all of this, David Lammy, the British Foreign Secretary, was in Geneva just yesterday trying to talk to his Iranian counterpart, and yet just hours after that, Donald Trump decides to, well, not only denigrate the European attempts to reach a diplomatic solution with Iran, but then just plow on with military action much earlier than that 2-week window that he had suggested. Doesn't exactly reek of the US working in lockstep with its closest Western allies.
No, and I suspect that will be one of the questions that MPs will want answering. What is the relationship between the UK and the US here? What influence does the UK and other European countries have, especially with regard to coming to an end to this? Because Sir Keir Starmer keeps talking about de-escalation, keeps talking about returning to the negotiating table, and that's exactly, that de-escalation is exactly what hasn't happened overnight. So that will be a question I'm sure that MPs will want to answer, either from the Foreign Secretary or from the Prime Minister when they return to Westminster tomorrow.
Tony Bonsignore, thanks very much indeed.
Thanks.
You are with BBC News. I'm Mark Lowen, live in Tel Aviv. A reminder, if you have just joined us, of our breaking news today. President Trump says that the United States military has carried out massive precision strikes on 3 key nuclear facilities in Iran and, in his words, destroyed them. They were at Fordow, Natanz and Isfahan. Iranian officials confirmed that all 3 strikes were mentioned were attacked, but said there was no irreversible damage. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu praised what he described as President Trump's bold decision, while the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, called the attacks a direct threat to international peace and security. Well, in the last couple of hours, sirens sounded out across Israel in what is being described as one of the most intense bombardments yet. Iranian state TV announced the fresh salvo of missiles on Israel. And during his address at the White House, President Trump said future attacks will be far greater and a lot easier if Iran does not make peace. Let's take a listen to what the president said a few hours ago.
A short time ago, the U.S. military carried out massive precision strikes on the 3 key nuclear facilities in the Iranian regime: Fordow, Natanz, and Esfahan. Everybody heard those names for years as they built this horribly destructive enterprise. Our objective was the destruction of Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity and a stop to the nuclear threat posed by the world's #1 state sponsor of terror. Tonight, I can report to the world that the strikes were a spectacular military success. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. Iran, the bully of the Middle East, must now make peace. If they do not, future attacks will be far greater and a lot easier. For 40 years, Iran has been saying death to America, death to Israel. They have been killing our people, blowing off their arms, blowing off their legs with roadside bombs. That was their specialty. We lost over 1,000 people, and hundreds of thousands throughout the Middle East and around the world have died as a direct result of their hate. In particular, so many were killed by their general, Qasem Soleimani. I decided a long time ago that I would not let this happen. It will not continue. I want to thank and congratulate Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu. We worked as a team like perhaps no team has ever worked before. And we've gone a long way to erasing this horrible threat to Israel. I want to thank the Israeli military for the wonderful job they've done. And most importantly, I want to congratulate the great American patriots who flew those magnificent machines tonight and all of the United States military on an operation the likes of which the world has not seen in many, many decades. Hopefully, we will no longer need their services in this capacity. I hope that's so. I also want to congratulate the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Raisin-Kane, spectacular general, and all of the brilliant military minds involved in this attack. With all of that being said, this cannot continue. There will be either peace or there will be tragedy for Iran far greater than we have witnessed over the last 8 days. Remember, there are many targets left. Tonight's was the most difficult of them all, by far, and perhaps the most lethal. But if peace does not come quickly, we will go after those other targets with precision, speed, and skill. Most of them can be taken out in a matter of minutes. There's no military in the world that could have done what we did tonight, not even close. There has never been a military that could do what took place just a little while ago. Tomorrow, General Kane, Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth will have a press conference at 8 a.m. at the Pentagon. And I want to just thank everybody, and in particular, God. I want to just say we love you, God, and we love our great military. Protect them. God bless the Middle East. God bless Israel, and God bless America. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Live from Tel Aviv, I'm Mark Lowen.
And from London, I'm Katrina Perry. This is BBC News.
We are continuing coverage of our breaking news today. President Trump says the United States has carried out massive precision strikes on 3 key nuclear facilities in Iran. In his words, obliterating them. Well, we saw a number of explosions over Tel Aviv, Jerusalem and Haifa in the past few hours after Iran launched a missile attack. Sirens sounded in several regions as Israel's defensive systems operated to intercept the threat. These pictures show some of the damage from Iranian attacks. Israel says a number of areas were hit in the north and center of the country, with Israel's Ministry of Health saying that at least 86 casualties have been reported.
Well, we'll be bringing you more on that in just a moment. But first, let's hear from President Trump as he announced that those strikes had taken place. During an address at the White House, he said future attacks would be far greater and a lot easier if Iran does not make peace.
A short time ago, the U.S. military carried out massive precision strikes on the 3 key nuclear facilities in the Iranian regime: Fordow, Natanz, and Esfahan. Everybody heard those names for years as they built this horribly destructive enterprise. Our objective was the destruction of Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity and a stop to the nuclear threat posed by the world's #1 state sponsor of terror. Tonight, I can report to the world that the strikes were a spectacular military success. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. Iran, the bully of the Middle East, must now make peace. If they do not, future attacks will be far greater and a lot easier. For 40 years, Iran has been saying death to America, death to Israel. They have been killing our people, blowing off their arms, blowing off their legs with roadside bombs. That was their specialty. We lost over 1,000 people, and hundreds of thousands throughout the Middle East and around the world have died as a direct result of their hate. In particular, so many were killed by their general, Qasem Soleimani. I decided a long time ago that I would not let this happen. It will not continue.
Well, as you heard there, President Trump said 3 key sites in Iran were hit. Let's have a look at just where they are. So they're Fordow, Natanz and Esfahan. President Trump said that Iran's facilities had been obliterated, his word. Esfahan is a uranium conversion plant, while Natanz is an enrichment plant. And even before the US strikes, the International Atomic Energy Agency said that Natanz has sustained severe damage. But the main site hit was Fordo. The uranium enrichment site is situated about 60 miles, 100 kilometres south of the capital, Tehran. It's located in a mountainous region and it's thought to consist of two main tunnels that house centrifuges used to enrich uranium, as well as a network of smaller tunnels. Now, reaching this underground installation, which is around 60 metres below ground, required the more powerful so-called bunker-busting bombs, which only the US has. And their official name is the GBU-57 Massive Ordnance Penetrator, and the only planes that could carry such bombs are B-2 stealth bombers. Senior Department of Defence officials confirmed that this was the bomb used in the attacks, with two being deployed for much of the nuclear targets. Now, we don't have pictures from inside Iran of the damage nor details of Iranian casualties. BBC journalists are currently unable to report from inside Iran due to restrictions by the Iranian government. Now, already Sir Keir Starmer has been reacting to this. He's called on Iran to return to the negotiating table after the US bombed those nuclear sites overnight. In a statement, the UK Prime Minister said stability in the region is a priority, and he described Iran's nuclear programme as a grave threat to international security. The BBC understands there was no UK involvement in those US strikes on those Iranian facilities, and that the Prime Minister was informed of them in advance. He said Iran can never be allowed to develop a nuclear weapon, and the US has taken action to alleviate that threat. The European Union has echoed those remarks, the EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas posting on X, urging all sides to step back and return to the negotiating table.
Well, meanwhile here, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu spoke after the strikes, praising President Trump for the decision and for American support for Israel.
Congratulations, President Trump. Your bold decision to target Iran's nuclear facilities with the awesome and righteous might of the United States will change history. In Operation Rising Lion, Israel has done truly amazing things. But in tonight's action against Iran's nuclear facilities, America has been truly unsurpassed. It has done what no other country on earth could do. History will record that President Trump acted to deny the world's most dangerous regime the world's most dangerous weapons. His leadership today has created a pivot of history that can help lead the Middle East and beyond to a future of prosperity and peace. President Trump and I often say, peace through strength. First comes strength, then comes peace. And tonight, President Trump and the United States acted with a lot of strength. President Trump, I thank you. The people of Israel thank you. The forces of civilization thank you. God bless America. God bless Israel. And may God bless our unshakable alliance, our unbreakable faith.
A delighted Israeli Prime Minister there. Well, in the past hour, Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi condemned the US strikes and said Iran is reserving all options to defend its sovereignty. In a post on X, Araghchi adds, the events this morning are outrageous and will have everlasting consequences. Each and every member of the UN, he said, must be alarmed over this extremely dangerous, lawless and criminal behaviour. Meanwhile, the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, that's the UN nuclear watchdog, Rafael Grossi, has responded to the strikes, posting, in light of the urgent situation in Iran, I am convening an emergency meeting of the IAEA Board of Governors for tomorrow, Monday. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has issued a statement about the strikes. He said, I am gravely alarmed by the use of force by the United States against Iran today. This is a dangerous escalation, he said, in a region already on the edge and a direct threat to international peace and security. He goes on, there is a growing risk that this conflict could rapidly get out of control with catastrophic consequences for civilians, the region and the world. Well, there have been, as we've been saying, Iranian missiles which have been fired into Israel this morning, one of the largest barrages that we have felt here or seen since the war began some 10 days ago. They hit here in Tel Aviv, but also in the north, in Haifa, and also around Jerusalem. Let's go to Jerusalem and speak to our correspondent, Dan Johnson. Dan, just describe what you saw and heard around you.
Yeah, it was just as Israelis were waking up this morning that the air raid sirens sounded after the alerts came through people's mobile phones. For many people, I think they were only just waking up and starting to absorb the news that these US strikes had taken place before they were feeling the first wave of retaliation by Iran. About 30 ballistic missiles that were fired towards different sites across Israel. We heard a very loud set of interception explosions here over Jerusalem, and we know that some of those missiles did get through. There are pictures of damaged buildings coming in from around the country. Reports of quite